The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty trail as the Wells Fargo stagecoach thundered through Deadman's Pass. Inside, 4 armed guards surrounded a locked strongbox containing gold worth more than most men would see in 10 lifetimes. The shipment was bound for the Territorial Bank in Austin, payment for railroad construction that would bring civilization deeper into the wild Texas frontier. "Easy, boys," muttered Frank Wilson, the lead guard, his weathered face scanning the rocky cliffs above. "We're almost through the pass." But Frank's instincts, honed through 15 years of service, screamed danger. Something wasn't right. The birds had gone silent. The wind seemed to hold its breath. From his vantage point high on the ridge, Ransom Red Calloway lowered his spyglass and smiled. His shock of red hair gleamed like fresh blood in the sunlight as he turned to the dozen hard-eyed men crouched behind him. "Gentlemen," he drawled, his voice carrying a cultured edge that belied his savage reputation, "it's time to make our withdrawal." His men chuckled at the joke, the sound like leather stretching over bone. When the stagecoach rounded the final bend, Red nodded to his demolition man. The explosion ripped through the narrow pass, sending rock and debris crashing down. The driver yanked hard on the reins, horses rearing in panic as the road ahead disappeared beneath a pile of rubble. "Ambush!" Frank shouted, but his warning came too late. Gunfire erupted from all sides. The guards returned fire, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Within minutes, 3 lay dead, their blood soaking into the thirsty earth. Only Frank remained, a bullet in his shoulder, his gun empty. Red Calloway approached on horseback, the setting sun silhouetting his imposing figure. His gang fell in behind him, a collection of the most hardened criminals the frontier had ever seen. "Well now," Red said, dismounting with casual grace, "I do appreciate you gentlemen delivering our gold." He knelt beside the strongbox they'd dragged from the coach, caressing it like a lover. "You won't get away with this," Frank spat, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Red looked up, genuine amusement in his ice-blue eyes. "My good man, I already have." He stood, brushing dust from his immaculate black coat. "But I need you to deliver a message." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Tell them the West belongs to us now." 200 miles away, in the sleepy town of Redemption, former Texas Ranger Jedediah "Jed" Hayes sat in the back corner of a saloon, nursing a whiskey as he had every evening for the past 5 years. His hair had gone gray, his once imposing frame now bent with age and regret. The saloon doors swung open as a breathless young man burst in. "They hit another gold shipment. Killed everyone except 1 guard. It's them Calloway boys again." The room erupted in shocked whispers, but in the corner, unnoticed by all, something changed in Jed Hayes' eyes. A fire, long extinguished, flickered to life. His hand, gnarled but still strong, closed around his glass. It was happening again. And this time he couldn't just sit by and watch. Before I continue with this story, I've got to ask, have you ever witnessed someone finding their courage again after years of hiding from their past? Let me know in the comments below where you're watching from and if this Western tale has grabbed your attention so far. Dawn broke crisp and cold over Elkhorn Ranch, the modest spread nestled against the foothills where Beau "Grizz" Grayson had retreated after hanging up his ranger badge. His massive frame moved with surprising grace as he chopped wood, each swing of the axe precise and powerful despite his 62 years. The steady rhythm halted at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. His hand instinctively moved to the revolver he still wore, even here, even now. "Little early for social calls," he muttered, squinting at the approaching rider silhouetted against the rising sun. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by disbelief. "Well, I'll be damned." Jedediah Hayes dismounted stiffly, his body protesting after the long night's ride. "Morning, Grizz. Still playing farmer, I see." "Better than playing dead in some saloon," Grizz retorted. But there was no malice in it. He extended his bear-like hand. "It's been what, 5 years?" 6, came another voice from the cabin doorway. Elias Doc Mallory stepped out, a coffee mug in one hand, his other resting on a silver-handled Colt. Though the smallest of the three men, his piercing gaze had lost none of its intensity. 6 years, 2 months, and 14 days since we buried Captain Harker, and swore we were done. The three men stood in a triangle of silence, the weight of shared history almost tangible between them. They had once been the most feared lawmen on the frontier, legends in their own time. Now they were relics, ghosts of a bygone era. "You didn't ride all night just to count my chickens," Grizz finally said. "What brings you here, Jed?" Inside the cabin, over coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe, Jed laid out what he knew about the gold shipment robberies. "It's Red Calloway. He's building something bigger than just a gang. Word is, he's got nearly 40 men now." Doc whistled low. 40 armed men with no law to answer to? That's an army, not a gang. Grizz leaned back, chair creaking under his weight. "We retired, Jed. We're old men now." "Tell that to the guards he killed," Jed shot back. "Tell that to the families who'll starve, because that gold was meant to be their pay." "There are younger men with stars on their chests," Doc interjected, absently running his finger along a scar that disappeared into his hairline. "This isn't our fight anymore." Jed slammed his cup down. "Isn't it? We spent 30 years bringing law to this territory. Are we just going to watch while men like Calloway tear it all down?" Silence settled again, heavier this time. Outside, a hawk screamed as it rode the thermals. "I'm not asking you to put the badge back on," Jed said finally, his voice softer. "I'm just asking you to remember why we wore it in the first place." Grizz and Doc exchanged a long look, decades of partnership allowing them to speak without words. It was Grizz who finally broke the silence. "Damn you, Jed Hayes," he growled, though there was a reluctant smile beneath his thick beard. "I was just getting used to sleeping through the night." Sheriff Amos Calloway stood at his office window, watching the town of Redemption stir to life in the early morning light. He absently traced the star pinned to his chest, the weight of it heavier than usual. The telegram in his hand confirmed his worst fears. The gold shipment robbery bore all the hallmarks of his younger brother's work. Ransom and Amos Calloway, born of the same blood, but walking different paths since boyhood. Amos chose the law, Ransom chose to break it. Now that choice was coming back to haunt them both. "More coffee, Sheriff?" Deputy Collins asked, hovering in the doorway. At 23, Collins was eager but green, hardly prepared for what might be coming. "No, Collins, but send word to the outlying farms. Tell them to be extra vigilant." Amos folded the telegram carefully. "And double the night patrols." The door to the sheriff's office slammed open, startling both men. Amos's hand dropped to his gun, then relaxed as 3 familiar figures entered. It had been years, but there was no mistaking them. Hayes, Grayson, and Mallory, the legendary rangers who had once mentored him. "Well," Amos said, straightening his shoulders, "to what do I owe this reunion?" Jed Hayes removed his hat, revealing hair more silver than black now. "Your brother, Amos. He's gone too far this time." The sheriff's face hardened. "I stopped being responsible for Red's actions a long time ago." "Maybe so," Grizz rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. "But you're responsible for this town." Amos braced his hands on his desk. "And I'm protecting it. My way. The legal way." Doc Mallory gave a humorless chuckle. "Legal won't cut it against 40 armed men, Sheriff. You know what your brother's capable of." Amos did know, better than anyone. The memory of their childhood home burning with their parents inside, while Red watched, fascinated by the flames, was seared into his mind. His brother had always had a darkness in him, a cruelty that no amount of love or guidance could temper. "You three need to understand something," Amos said, lowering his voice. "Red won't just rob this town. If he's coming here, and I fear he is, he'll want to destroy it. He'll want to destroy me." "Why here?" Jed asked. "Because I represent everything he hates." Amos sighed, suddenly looking older than his 40 years. Law, order, respect earned instead of taken. A commotion outside drew their attention. A wagon was pulling into town, the driver whipping the horses to a desperate pace. On the flatbed lay a man, his body broken and bloody. They rushed outside as townspeople gathered around the wagon. The injured man was Jacob Turner, who owned a small farm 10 miles out. His wife Sarah cradled his head, her dress stained with his blood. "They came at dawn," she sobbed. "Said they were leaving a message. Said to tell everyone that the Calloway gang runs these parts now, and those who don't submit will end up worse than Jacob." Amos knelt beside the wagon. Jacob's eyes fluttered open, recognition and relief flooding his battered face at the sight of the sheriff. "There were so many of them," Jacob whispered. "They wore red bandanas. Their leader had hair like fire." The Rangers exchanged grim looks. Red Calloway wasn't just sending a message. He was declaring war. "Get Doc Wilson," Amos ordered his deputy, then turned to face the 3 Rangers. His expression was that of a man who had run out of options. "How soon can you ride?" The 3 Rangers and Sheriff Amos rode out at first light, following the trail left by Red's men. They traveled light and fast, each man carrying only what he needed: ammunition, water, and enough provisions for a few days. The morning dew still clung to the scrub brush as their horses picked their way along the rocky terrain. "Tracks show at least 8 riders," Grizz said, his eyes scanning the ground from atop his massive buckskin horse. Despite his size, he had always been the best tracker among them. "Heading southeast towards Diablo Canyon." Doc adjusted the bandolier across his chest. "Red's not stupid enough to use the canyon as a hideout. Too obvious." "Maybe," Jed replied, his voice thoughtful. "Or maybe he's counting on us thinking exactly that." They rode in silence for a time, each man lost in his own thoughts. For Amos, this pursuit was deeply personal. For the Rangers, it was a return to a life they had thought left behind. The weight of their guns felt familiar against their hips, muscle memory guiding their movements as they scanned the horizon for threats. "I know him," Amos said grimly as they dismounted to investigate. "Mike Larson worked as a courier for the bank in Austin." He turned the body over, revealing a bullet hole precisely between the eyes. This was an execution. Doc knelt beside the body, his experienced hands searching through the dead man's pockets. He pulled out a crumpled note and smoothed it against his knee. "Delivery confirmed. Meeting at the old mission as planned. The buyer arrives tomorrow." He looked up at the others. "Signed with an R." "Buyer?" Grizz's brow furrowed. "Red's not just stealing gold. He's selling it to someone." "That changes things," Jed said. "If he's working with someone else, this goes deeper than just a gang of outlaws." They buried Mike Larson under a cottonwood tree, marking his grave with stones. No words were spoken. Such ceremonies had become all too familiar during their ranger days. As they continued, the trail grew more confusing. Tracks scattered, then converged again, suggesting Red's men were deliberately trying to throw off pursuers. "Look at this," Amos called out, dismounting near a rock formation. Something glinted in the dirt. He bent down and picked up a gold coin, freshly minted. "They're getting careless. Or they want us to follow," Doc cautioned. By late afternoon, they reached a crossroads where the trail seemingly disappeared. Grizz dismounted, walking in slow circles as he read the ground. "They split up here," he finally announced. "Several headed that way." He pointed northeast. But 3 riders continued southeast, pushing hard from the depth of these tracks. "The gold's with the 3, Jed decided. "Red would keep it close." "Or it's a trap," Amos warned. Jed nodded slowly. "Most likely both, but we don't have a choice." He looked at each man in turn. Red's not just building a gang. From what that note says, he's creating alliances. If he's selling that gold to buy weapons or men, he could become powerful enough to threaten more than just a few towns. As the sun began to sink towards the horizon, they made their decision. They would follow the 3 riders. straight into whatever trap awaited them. Because sometimes walking into a trap was the only way to spring it. While the Rangers pursued their prey across the unforgiving Texas wilderness, Red Calloway's plans were already in motion. The town of Redemption, left with only young Deputy Collins and a handful of hastily deputized citizens, was about to discover just how vulnerable it truly was. The gang rode in at high noon when the sun blazed directly overhead and shadows disappeared beneath men's boots. Not in a chaotic rush like common bandits, but in formation, 30 riders strong, moving with military precision that sent chills down the spines of onlookers. Red Calloway led them, resplendent in a black duster despite the heat, his crimson hair appearing almost supernatural in the harsh sunlight. He reined his stallion to a halt in the center of town, surveying the dusty streets and wooden buildings with the calculating gaze of a man assessing property he already considered his own. "Where's your sheriff?" Red called out, his cultured voice carrying easily in the hushed silence that had fallen. "I've come to pay my respects to my dear brother." Deputy Collins stepped forward, his young face trying desperately to project authority despite the slight tremor in his hands. "Sheriff Calloway isn't here. I'm in charge until he returns." Red's laughter was genuine and chilling. "Are you indeed? Well, that simplifies matters considerably." With a casual flick of his wrist, he signaled his men, who dismounted and began systematically taking control of the town. The saloon was their first target. Inside, Clara Monroe watched with cold fury as Red's men poured in, overturning tables and helping themselves to her best whiskey. Unlike the other frightened patrons, Clara stood her ground, one hand hidden beneath the bar where she kept a sawed-off shotgun. "Well, well," Red drawled as he sauntered in, removing his gloves with theatrical slowness. "What have we here? A woman with spirit?" His eyes, blue as a winter sky but lacking any warmth, fixed on her. "You must be Clara Monroe. Your reputation precedes you." "Get out of my establishment," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Red smiled, a predator's grin that never reached his eyes. "I don't think you understand the new order of things, Miss Monroe. This is my town now, my territory." He leaned across the bar. "And you'd do well to remember that." Outside, Red's men had already set up checkpoints at every street corner. The town's few businesses, the general store, the blacksmith, the small bank, all found themselves under new management as armed men took up positions. By sundown, Redemption had been transformed from a peaceful frontier town into an occupied territory. And as darkness fell, the townsfolk huddled in their homes, wondering if their sheriff and the legendary Rangers would return in time to save them, or if they were already dead in the unforgiving wilderness. Night fell over the Diablo Canyon like a heavy shroud, stars pricking through the inky blackness one by one. The Rangers and Sheriff Amos had tracked Red's men to an abandoned trading post nestled against the canyon wall. From their vantage point on a rocky ridge, they could see the glow of campfires and the shadows of men moving about. "I count 15, maybe 20, Doc whispered, lowering his spyglass. 4 guards posted, the rest drinking and gambling." Jed nodded, his eyes never leaving the camp below. "They're not expecting trouble, not yet." "That strongbox has to be in the main building," Amos added. "Red wouldn't let it out of his sight." Grizz checked his rifle, the familiar routine calming his nerves. "So what's the plan? The 4 of us against 20 of them ain't great odds." "We're not here to take them all on," Jed replied. "Not tonight. But we need to send a message, let Red know we're coming for him." A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. "And I'd like to relieve them of some of that gold." Under the cover of darkness, they executed their plan with the precision that had made them legends. Doc slipped away first, silent as a shadow, making his way to the makeshift corral where the gang's horses were kept. Grizz positioned himself on a ledge overlooking the camp, his rifle ready. Jed and Amos approached from opposite sides, using the darkness and years of experience to avoid the sentries. One guard, separated from the others, never saw Jed coming. A hand clamped over his mouth, the press of cold steel against his neck. and then unconsciousness as Jed lowered him silently to the ground. Across the camp, Amos did the same to another guard, the sheriff moving with a skill that surprised even himself. Some things, it seemed, you never forgot. Inside the main building, two men played cards by lamplight, a wooden strongbox sitting on the floor between them. Neither noticed the window sliding open, nor the small object that rolled across the floor until it began emitting thick, acrid smoke. The commotion finally alerted the camp. Men scrambled for weapons, shouting in confusion. That's when Grizz opened fire from his perch, not aiming to kill, but to create chaos, his shots kicking up dirt and splintering wood around the Outlaws' feet. Meanwhile, Doc had spooked the horses, sending them stampeding through the camp in a thunder of hooves and panicked whinnies. In the confusion, Jed and Amos dragged the strongbox out and lashed it to a waiting horse. By the time Red's men regained any semblance of order, the Rangers were gone, melting into the night like ghosts, taking with them not just gold, but also something more valuable, the gang's sense of security. Miles away, as they finally stopped to rest, Amos pried open the strongbox. Inside was only a portion of the stolen gold, but there was something else, a ledger with names, dates, and figures that told a story far more disturbing than simple robbery. Red Calloway's rage was a terrifying thing to behold. The trading post lay in disarray around him, overturned furniture, scattered playing cards, and the still smoldering remains of the smoke bomb. His men stood in a nervous semicircle, each hoping to avoid becoming the target of their leader's wrath. They took the ledger, Red's lieutenant, a scarred man known only as Jackson, reported reluctantly, and about a quarter of the gold. Red's face remained eerily calm, but his eyes burned with cold fury. "Rangers," he said simply. "Has to be. No one else would dare." He turned to face his men. "They think they've sent us a message. It's time we replied in kind." In redemption, Clara Monroe was closing up her saloon for the night when rough hands grabbed her from behind. Before she could scream, a cloth was pressed against her mouth, the sickly sweet smell overwhelming her senses before darkness claimed her. She awoke in what appeared to be an abandoned mine shaft, wrists bound to a support beam. A lantern cast grotesque shadows on the rock walls. She wasn't alone. "Miss Monroe!" Red Calloway stepped into the light, his refined manner more terrifying than any outburst of rage could be. "I apologize for the accommodations, but you're serving a greater purpose." "The Rangers will kill you for this," Clara spat, pulling futilely at her bonds. Red smiled indulgently. "That's precisely what I'm counting on, my dear. They'll come for you, Jed Hayes in particular, if my sources are correct about your history with him." He leaned closer. "And when they do, they'll walk right into my trap." Meanwhile, at an abandoned homestead where they'd made camp, the Rangers pored over the ledger they'd captured. "It's worse than we thought," Doc said grimly. "Red's not just selling gold. He's using it to buy guns, military-grade rifles and ammunition." He tapped the page. "Enough to outfit a small army." "The question is, why?" Grizz rumbled. "What's he planning with all that firepower?" Before anyone could answer, hoofbeats approached. They drew their weapons, relaxing only when Deputy Collins rode into view, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Sheriff!" Collins gasped, dismounting. "They've taken the town, and they've got Miss Monroe!" Amos's face was drained of color. "Clara, why her?" "Because of me," Jed said quietly, his voice hollow with realization. "Red knows about our past." "There's more," Collins continued breathlessly. "They left this." He handed over a crude map showing the location of an abandoned mine. Scrawled across it were the words, "Come alone, Rangers, or the woman dies first." "It's a trap," Doc stated flatly. "Of course it is," Jed agreed, already checking his gun. "But we don't have a choice." Grizz placed a massive hand on Jed's shoulder. "We always have a choice, old friend. The question is, how do we turn this trap against him?" As dawn approached, they formulated their desperate plan. They would spring the trap, but on their terms. The odds were overwhelming, but if there was one thing the Rangers had learned over decades of service, it was this. Sometimes the most dangerous gamble was the only one worth taking, and Clara's life wasn't the only thing at stake. The future of the entire frontier hung in the balance. Sheriff Amos Calloway rode alone through the pre-dawn darkness, his thoughts as tangled as the trail ahead. The Rangers' plan was risky, perhaps foolishly so, but they had few options with Clara's life hanging in the balance. His role was crucial. Approach his brother under the pretense of negotiation, while the Rangers positioned themselves around the mine. Blood versus badge, family versus duty. The conflict had haunted Amos for years, but now it demanded resolution. The eastern sky was just beginning to pale when he reached the abandoned Silverado mine. Red's men emerged from hiding spots among the rocks, guns trained on him as he approached with his hands raised. They led him into the mine shaft, past support beams that groaned under the weight of the mountain above. Red waited in a chamber lit by lanterns, seated like a king holding court. Clara was bound to a support beam nearby, her defiant expression giving way to surprise at the sight of Amos. "Little brother," Red greeted him, rising with theatrical grace. "Come to surrender your town properly?" "I've come to talk," Amos replied, removing his hat. "This has gone far enough, Ransom." Red's eyes hardened at the use of his given name. "It's barely begun." He gestured expansively. "Do you know what I'm building here, Amos? Not just a gang, an empire. When I'm finished, I'll control every route through this territory. And how many more people will die for this empire of yours?" Red shrugged, unconcerned. "As many as necessary." His gaze sharpened. "Where are your ranger friends?" "I came alone," Amos lied. "To offer you a deal." "A deal?" Red laughed. "What could you possibly offer me?" Amos took a deep breath. "Me. Let Clara go, leave redemption alone, and I'll come with you. No resistance." "How noble," he mocked. "But unnecessary." He snapped his fingers, and more of his men entered, dragging a bloodied figure between them. It was Deputy Collins. Amos's blood ran cold. Their ambush was compromised before it had even begun. "You disappoint me, Amos," Red continued. "Did you really think I wouldn't have men watching every approach?" He drew his pistol, leveling it at Amos's chest. "Family or not, betrayal has consequences." "Don't do this, Ransom," Amos pleaded, taking a step forward. "It's not too late to end this." "For you, it is," Red replied coldly. The gunshot echoed through the mine shaft. Amos staggered backward, shock registering on his face as he looked down at the spreading crimson stain on his shirt. He fell to his knees, his eyes never leaving his brother's face. "Why?" he gasped, his voice barely audible. Red holstered his gun, unmoved by his brother's suffering. "Because you chose the wrong side a long time ago." Outside, the sound of the shot reached the hidden Rangers. The plan had failed. Worse, they were now walking into an ambush of Red's making. "God help us," Grizz muttered as they prepared to move in anyway. They couldn't abandon Amos and Clara, even if it meant walking into certain death. Inside the mine, Red knelt beside his dying brother and whispered, "The Rangers are about to join you, Amos. Your legend ends today, and mine begins." Back in Redemption, the absence of Sheriff Calloway and Deputy Collins had not gone unnoticed. Red's men, believing themselves unopposed, had grown lax in their control, drinking heavily and terrorizing citizens with increasing cruelty. Inside Clara's saloon, now serving as the gang's headquarters, several townspeople had gathered under the watchful but increasingly intoxicated eyes of their captors. Among them was Nathan Miller, the town blacksmith, whose massive hands could bend iron and had once broken a man's jaw in a fair fight. "Can't just sit here waiting to be rescued," Nathan whispered to those around him. "The sheriff and the Rangers might already be dead." Sarah Turner, whose husband Jacob still lay recovering from the gang's brutal beating, nodded grimly. "If we don't stand up now, There won't be a town left to save. Their hushed conversation was interrupted by the crash of a bottle. One of Red's men, a brute called Farley, stumbled toward their table. "What are you whispering about?" he slurred, hand resting menacingly on his pistol. Nathan rose slowly, his imposing figure towering over Farley. "Just wondering when you boys might be moving on. You've had your fun." Farley's face contorted with rage. "Fun's just starting!" He drew his pistol, but his drunken reflexes betrayed him. Nathan's fist connected with his jaw in a sickening crunch, sending him crashing to the floor. The saloon erupted into chaos. The townspeople, pushed beyond endurance, fell upon Red's men with desperate fury. What they lacked in skill, they made up for in numbers and righteous anger. When it was over, 5 of Red's men lay dead or unconscious. The survivors had been bound with rope from the general store. "We've chosen our side now," Nathan announced to the gathered townspeople. "No turning back." Word spread quickly through Redemption. At the church, the elderly Reverend Walsh opened a hidden compartment beneath the pulpit, revealing guns that had been stored there since the Apache raids years before. "The Lord helps those who help themselves," he declared, distributing the weapons. By midday, Redemption had transformed. Barricades rose at strategic points throughout town. Women melted down lead for bullets while men positioned themselves on rooftops and in windows. Even children played their part, carrying messages and supplies between defensive positions. Thomas Green, the school teacher who had fought in the Civil War, organized their defenses with military precision. "Red's main force is still out there," he reminded them. "When they return, and they will, we need to be ready." As the sun began its descent, a rider appeared on the horizon, galloping at full speed toward town. Rifles trained on the approaching figure until someone recognized Deputy Collins, bloodied but alive. "The Rangers!" he gasped as they pulled him from his saddle. "They're walking into a trap at Silverado Mine. The sheriff's been shot." "Then we'd better get there in time to help them," she said, mounting her husband's horse. One by one, others followed her example. The people of Redemption were done hiding. They were riding to war. Gunfire echoed through the canyons surrounding the Silverado Mine, the sharp cracks ricocheting off rock faces and creating the illusion of a much larger battle. Jed, Grizz, and Doc were pinned down behind a cluster of boulders, Red's men firing from fortified positions around the mine entrance. "They knew we were coming!" Doc shouted over the din, wincing as a bullet chipped stone inches from his head. Amos wouldn't betray us," Jed cut him off, though doubt clouded his eyes. He peered around the boulder, nearly losing his hat to a sniper's bullet. "We need to get closer." Grizz emptied his rifle at a cluster of outlaws, forcing them back into cover. "We're not going anywhere without help, Jed. There's too many of them." Inside the mine, Clara worked frantically at her bonds, the rough rope finally giving way as she rubbed it against a jagged edge of the support beam. Sheriff Amos lay nearby, his breathing shallow, blood pooling beneath him. "Hold on, Sheriff," she whispered, crawling to his side. "I'm going to get us out of here." Red had left only 2 guards with them, confident in his trap outside. Clara picked up a fallen lantern, took a deep breath, and hurled it at the nearest guard. The glass shattered, oil splashing across his chest before igniting. His screams brought the second guard running, straight into Amos's outstretched leg. As he stumbled, Clara grabbed his fallen gun and fired without hesitation. Outside, the battle suddenly shifted as riders appeared on the ridge above, dozens of them, ordinary townspeople armed with determination and whatever weapons they could find. Nathan Miller led the charge, his voice booming across the canyon. "For redemption!" The unexpected reinforcements threw Red's carefully laid trap into disarray. His men, caught between the Rangers' deadly accuracy and the townspeople's furious assault, began to fall back. Red Calloway watched his plans unravel from his vantage point, cold fury replacing his usual calculating demeanor. One thought consumed him. If he was going down, Jed Hayes would go with him. The battle for Silverado Mine raged with the intensity of a prairie fire, sweeping across the rocky terrain as townspeople and outlaws clashed in desperate combat. Amid the chaos, Jed Hayes fought his way toward the mine entrance, driven by the need to find Clara and Amos. Red Calloway watched from higher ground, his face twisted with hatred as he recognized his old nemesis. With deliberate calm, he checked his revolver, then descended into the fray, cutting a path straight toward Jed. "Hayes!" Red's voice carried over the gunfire. "It ends today!" Jed turned, instantly recognizing the voice that had haunted his dreams for years. Their eyes locked across the battlefield, decades of enmity crystallizing into this single moment. "Send your men away, Red," Jed called back, holstering his gun in a deliberate challenge. "This is between us." Surprisingly, Red nodded, raising his hand to signal his remaining men to cease fire. The gunshots gradually subsided, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the moans of the wounded. The two men circled each other in the suddenly empty space between the opposing forces. Red's handsome face was marred by a sneer, his elegant coat now dust-covered and torn. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long, old man," Red said, his voice carrying to the hushed onlookers. "Always hiding behind that badge, pretending you're better than me." "I never wanted this, Red," Jed replied, his weathered face solemn. "You made your choices." Red's laugh was cold and empty. "Choices? We're not so different, Hayes. We both live by the gun." "The difference is who we aim at," Jed countered. For a moment longer they circled, two predators taking each other's measure. Then, with snake-like speed, Red went for his gun. But age and treachery overcome youth and skill. Jed had started his draw a fraction of a second earlier, anticipating Red's move. His bullet found its mark before Red's gun had cleared its holster. Red Calloway staggered backward, surprise replacing the arrogance in his eyes. He looked down at the spreading crimson stain on his chest, then backed up at Jed. "I never—" he began, but never finished the thought. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows across Redemption's main street. 1 week had passed since the battle at Silverado Mine, and the town was slowly returning to normal, though normal would never be quite the same again. Sheriff Amos Calloway had survived his brother's bullet, though the doctor said he'd carry that lead in his chest for the rest of his days. He sat on the porch of his office now, arm in a sling, watching as the 3 Rangers prepared to leave town. "You sure you won't stay?" he asked, as Jed Hayes tightened the cinch on his saddle. "Town could use men like you." Jed smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "Our time has passed, Amos. This is your town now, yours and theirs." He nodded toward the citizens going about their business, heads held higher than before, a new confidence in their step. Near the saloon, Clara Monroe stood watching the preparations. When Jed approached, she handed him a package wrapped in oilcloth. "Provisions," she explained, "and something to remember me by." Their eyes met, holding volumes of unspoken words between them. Regrets for a past that couldn't be changed, and acceptance of the paths they had chosen. "Take care of yourself, Clara," Jed said softly. "You too, Ranger." She reached up and straightened his bandana, her touch lingering for just a moment. "Try not to get shot again." Grizz and Doc were already mounted, waiting at the edge of town. They nodded respectfully to the gathered townspeople who had come to see them off. "You know," Doc mused, "for a while there I almost remembered what it felt like to be young again." Grizz snorted. "Speak for yourself. My bones are telling me I'm about 100 years old right now." Jed swung into the saddle with only a slight grimace betraying his recently bandaged wounds. He surveyed the town one last time, the rebuilt storefronts, the new graves in the cemetery, the faces that would forever remember what had happened here. "Where to now?" Doc asked. Jed shrugged, adjusting his hat against the setting sun. "Heard there's trouble down near the border. Rustlers giving the ranchers fits. Always something, isn't there?" Grizz sighed, though there was a gleam in his eye that belied his complaint. "That's why they need men like us," Jed replied simply. With a final nod to Sheriff Calloway and Clara, Jed turned his horse and led his companions out of town. The three riders moved at an unhurried pace, silhouettes growing smaller against the vast horizon. The legend of how three aging rangers and a town full of ordinary people had brought down the notorious Calloway gang would spread across the territory. But for Jed, Grizz, and Doc, it was just another chapter in a lifetime of service. Some men were born to wear the badge, even long after they'd pinned it to their chests, and as long as there was injustice to fight, their work would never truly be done. If you thought this story of redemption and justice was something, you won't want to miss what happens in our next video. The frontier holds many more tales of courage and betrayal just waiting to be told.